And they are groups of people that range from extreme cults on the one hand to fraternities and sororities, people that get together occasionally and have similar kinds of values and beliefs. So there are a number of these New Age religions that have come out with these same kinds of ideas, and the central idea that sort of brings them all together is that Native American groups in particular, because they've been living in where they've been living for so many hundreds or thousands of years, have developed special connections with the earth. Cosmological connections, spiritual connections. They have a particular depth of advanced kind of ecological knowledge, local ecological knowledge, so that when things happen in the world, whether it's in their environment or up in space, they understand the significance of it because they've been living in that place for so long and have this special kind of knowledge. And they're very true. I mean, people have that have been living in the Americas for thousands of years do have special local ecological knowledge. It's very, very true. Nobody says anything against that. Not only do they have that as their core belief, but they trace back their interpretations of those kinds of connections to the time when Christopher Columbus sort of discovered the New World for Europeans and the rest of the world. And Columbus's very last book that he wrote was called the Book of Prophecies. And he believed, like many people at that time, because of all this new discoveries of the New World and all these things going on, he believed that there was going to be an apocalypse in his lifetime. And so he wrote this Book of Prophecies. Some of his prophecies are based on writings that he encountered among the Maya, that he and the Spanish encountered in this discovery of the New World, this great encounter. Those descriptions of the Maya writings served as the basis for a really very, very popular book called Utopia that Thomas More, a philosopher and politician really, back in the early 1500s wrote. You've all heard of the term utopia, and this is where it comes from, this book, back in 1516. And it's a fictional work, it's not nonfiction, it's a fictional work, and it describes the journey of this guy, and he goes to what's now we know as Brazil, and he travels around, and he talks about, how all of the Native Americans there are living in harmony with the world, and they all share everything, and they're very egalitarian, and everything's made of gold, and everything's perfect, and all this stuff that sounds like communism. But he's talking about a utopia, a perfect society. And many of his descriptions, though, of the way that people interact with one another are very good, close descriptions of the way that the Maya were organized socially and politically. And so in this book, Utopia, it served really as the basis for a lot of New World religions. Now New World religions know that this was really a critique of European society at the time. It wasn't a description of anything real or anything. But it's kind of like what would be like a Michener novel. You read, James Michener. It's not true, but it's based on historical fact. So a lot of what he's saying is true, but he, sort of puts a spin on it. So this is kind of like a Michener novel. And so a lot of these New Age religions trace back their knowledge of the Maya and how the Maya interact with each other and with the earth, back to this idea of a utopian society. So what they are saying are two things, two real specific things. The first thing that these New Age groups have been saying since the 1950s is the 13th calendrical cycle will end on December 21st, 2012. And this is a direct quote from something that the Maya wrote about 1,500 years ago. The second thing that they're saying, another direct quote from what the Maya said, is Mayai kabile naitun kut sokole. This is the destruction of the world. This then is its end. That sounds pretty specific. What I'd like to do with the rest of this talk is to unpack those two sentences and put them back in context. I'm an archaeologist, and archaeologists do not study fossils. We study people, ancient cultures, and we study artifacts. And in order to understand the meaning of an artifact, we have to discover it in the ground. We have to see what's above it and below it and over to the side of it and what other kinds of artifacts are near it, and that's called context. Keeping it in its context so we understand the meaning. When you pull something out of the ground and you put it in a museum or in a storage case or in your home, it's out of context and we have no idea what the meaning is. So what's happened in this case is New Age religions have pulled these sentences out of their context, out of their literary context, and stuck them together and created a whole new meaning about apocalypse. When really, this has nothing to do with apocalypse. And I'll show you why in just a couple of slides. Before we quite get there, I just want to introduce you to the Maya world. For those of you who don't know where the Maya world is, it's pretty close. It's about a 2-hour flight from here, or less, on United. And the Maya world is in southern Mexico, the Yucatan Peninsula. It encompasses also Belize, Guatemala, and then parts of El Salvador and Honduras. So it's not too far away. Some of you may have traveled there for vacation. There are a lot of wonderful vacation spots there. Tulum, Chichen Itza, the Great Beach, all the beaches there. The second largest barrier reef is there, so there's a lot of scuba diving. Some of you may have gone on cruises there. That's where Cozumel is, all these great tour destinations. So that's where the Maya world is. And to put it in historical context, the Maya are a group of people with shared values and beliefs, and they share culture, they share the same kinds of practices, the same kinds of material goods, but they're part of a much longer Native American tradition that began about 2000 BC, began about 4,000 years ago, with a group that moved into this area that we call Mesoamerica, or Middle America. And this is a group we refer to as the Olmec people. And they lived on the Gulf of Mexico, around Veracruz and Tabasco. So if you go to Fort DeSoto and you look straight across the bay of Mexico, you'll see right where the Olmec were living. Well, you can't see that far in that direction. Straight across the border. After the Olmec, these people moved into the area of what is now Guatemala and Belize and built great big cities and are world famous because they're one of the only populations on Earth to have independently invented the concept or the idea of zero. And so by doing that, they could do complex mathematical calculations, and they did. They were expert astronomers. They were one of the only groups, one of only 6 groups in the history of the world to independently invent writing and able to transcribe their language into written text. And by doing that, they were able to record all of these mathematical calculations. And so they were great mathematicians and astronomers, and eventually occupied all of southern Mexico and that Yucatan Peninsula. Never united as some kind of an empire, never united. They were always separate city-states, kind of like the Greek city-states, Athens and Sparta, always warring, that kind of thing. So never united as a people. Something happened, and this is a great debate right now, and a lot of people are blaming it on climate change, of course, because that's the fashionable thing to do. But something happened around AD 850, and all of the Maya that were in all of these big cities, and we're talking about millions of people, maybe 50,000 to 100,000 people per city, suddenly left the city. Within less than a generation, within probably 10 to 15 years, people migrated out of cities and into the countryside and just abandoned all of their nice fancy ways. No more writing, no more astronomical observations, anything like that. They just left. They didn't disappear, they didn't die, they just decided to leave. That's what happened. And we don't know why. And some people are saying, climate change and it made agriculture unable to support large populations of people in small spaces. But that's a topic that we're investigating right now. So after that period, then we see a new population moving into central Mexico. And you've probably heard of this group, the Aztecs. These are the Aztecs that sort of post-date this classic Maya that we're talking about. And they come to create an empire that is unified, and they come to take over economically and politically most of Mesoamerica, or this Middle America area. And this is what Columbus and Hernán Cortés encounter when they come to the New World. They encounter the Aztecs everywhere. And in the area, when they do come to the Maya area, they do see Maya peoples, but they aren't in these big cities like the Aztec, and they don't have these kings and queens and all of this kind of stuff that the Aztec described. No gold and all over the place. So the Spanish, when they arrive, they're not too interested in the Maya area. The Maya are not that sophisticated, and they don't have a lot of resources, and so they kind of ignore them and go and focus on the Aztec Empire with all that fancy gold and stuff. Wouldn't you? And that's great, though, historically, because because they really kind of left the Maya alone, the Maya persist for at least 100+ years after the Spanish arrived. And the Spanish are able to talk to them. They're not completely decimated by disease or enslaved. And the Spanish are able to write down aspects of their religious beliefs, aspects of their language. And so we get a lot of really rich information about cosmology and religion from the Maya because they were largely ignored when the Spanish arrived. So this is what satellite image from NASA of the area of Yucatan. And what I want to do is just point out a couple of really exciting archaeological finds over the past 50 or so years that have revolutionized our ideas about who the Maya were and what they said about these prophecies and things that were coming about. We know about the Maya from a couple of explorers in the 1880s who went around and they created these wonderful travel books. They went to ancient Egypt, and they went all over the Near East, and they created these great travel books. And then they had the idea, hey, let's go to Central America, let's hop on a barge and travel around and look at stuff and write travel books. Travel books became really, really popular in the later part of the 1800s. And so they were part of this. And so they went around and they saw all of these great Maya ruins and wrote about it. And they brought along this guy named Frederick Catherwood, who was a lithographer. And he did these beautiful lithographs of all the different what are now archaeological ruins by the time that these guys find them. And they bring this travel book back, and it's an instant success, a world success. Everybody's buying this book, reading about the Maya. It's really exciting because it was largely believed in the 1800s and the 1700s by folks in the US and elsewhere that Native Americans were not very sophisticated or not very complex in their thinking. They couldn't build big monuments. They couldn't have a written language. They couldn't do all this sophisticated stuff. So when these explorers found all these huge temples and huge ruins and great sculptures and amazing things, it just turned the idea of Native American simplicity on its head. And people became really interested in this area and how complex Native American societies could be. And so some of the bigger institutions like the Smithsonian, the National Museum of Natural History, even the Penn Museum at that time, the University of Pennsylvania, they sent down archaeologists in droves to go get this stuff. This is at a time when archaeology was not that advanced, and so these aren't careful scientific excavations. These are people that are agents of museums that are being employed to go and find nice things to bring back to the museum. And one of the things that really spurred a lot of this collecting of stuff was the World's Fair. You remember the World's Fair? They still have World's Fair. But it was really big in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So a lot of museums would go down and get Maya monuments and sculpture, artifacts, and bring it back to the World's Fair. And this is how the world really came to know who the Maya were and became really excited and enthralled by the Maya. It was really through museums and the World's Fair. Up until this time, though, what archaeologists and explorers are encountering are really big cities that are empty. They're ruins, right? And so the idea sort of emerged informally that the Maya were priests and astronomers that lived largely in empty ceremonial centers, and that everybody else were farmers, and they only came to these ceremonial centers during certain times of the year, like for pilgrimage and things like that. And so that's the belief of the Maya up until about the 1940s, when one of these explorers, who was a well-known photographer, was out canoeing along the river, and he met a couple of contemporary Maya, little Lacandon Maya boys, and he wanted to show him some cool, ancient Maya city. And so he's all game because he's got his camera, he's taking pictures, and they led him to an archaeological site that we've translated the name for, and it's called Bonampak. We don't know what it means, but that's its name. It's in southern Mexico, right on the border with Guatemala, right by the Usumacinta River, the big Usumacinta River. And he stumbles into this series of very small buildings, small temples. He had just been to some big sites, like you may have heard of the site called Tikal in Guatemala. It's a big tourist site. It's where they filmed Star Wars, actually. The flyover, you see the Maya temple sticking out. Tikal is a really big Maya site. He had just been there and he had been wowed. And so they led him to this little crummy site, and so he wasn't very impressed. So he was on his way back to the canoe, and he decided, and it starts to rain, so he decides to get out of the rain, and so he ducks into one of these temples. and lights his torch and holds it up. And this is what he saw. One of the most colorful, dramatic, beautiful murals ever found in the in the Maya area. Just amazing. This is the doorway of the temple. So he came in, stumbled in, lights his thing up, turns around and goes, yikes. And what he saw, and what he would later photograph and bring back to everybody else who hadn't seen this, was something that truly transformed Maya archaeology and our understanding of the Mayas we know it. This is a scene that takes place after a great battle. And I don't know if you can make it out, but there are people that are dressed up in all kinds of costumes. There's somebody who looks like a warrior up there, maybe a king or a queen up there. All kinds of great things are going on. Here's a woman who's a queen. She's got this great big beautiful fan, and she's fanning herself. It's just a wonderful scene. There are people here with spears, and they look kind of like warriors almost. But what is the center part of the scene are these almost naked guys sitting up here. And they don't look like they're doing so well. I mean, look at how he's laying. He's beat. And in fact, they are probably the losing group, you know, in this great battle. And these are captives that are probably destined for some kind of sacrifice or something bad. And we can suggest that because there's a human head just laying here on the step by this guy's foot, almost touching his foot. But what's really exciting is, what are these guys doing? He's looking down at his hand, and his hand is bleeding. I think I have it zoomed in. Yeah, we can zoom in a little bit and look. And he's looking really horrified at his hand, and there's blood drops coming down out of his hand. And if you really get in close and look, you can see that all his fingernails have been removed. So these are not, it turns out, peaceful, loving Maya that are pictured in the Utopia book. These are warriors. These are people who have propensity for violence, just like any other society on Earth. These are real people. And so when these photographs came out, we started to understand the complexity of Maya society. These are not just little forest dwellers and peaceful astronomers, but these are real people, blood and guts and all. Really remarkable. Just about 5 years after this discovery surfaces, well, when this discovery happens, there is an archaeologist at the University of Pennsylvania Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology, very famous museum. And he sees these photographs and is super excited and wants to go down and excavate this site and excavate other places in the area. And he wants to bring with him an artist, just like the explorers did a long time ago that brought Frederick Catherwood who did those beautiful lithographs. He wants to bring an artist with him. So he meets this young lady who is out of a job. She was trained as an illustrator, a drafter, and she doesn't speak any English. She comes from Russia. Her family moved to the U.S. in 1915, and at the request of Tsar Nicholas II, her dad was this famous chemist, and Tsar Nicholas wanted her dad to come to the U.S. and oversee chemical production during World War I. And so then the Russian Revolution happened, and they couldn't move back to Russia, so they were kind of stuck there in Pennsylvania, of all places. So she's unemployed, doesn't speak English, doesn't know what to do. This archaeologist, Lyndon Satterthwaite is his name. He sees her, he meets her, he sees what she can do, he's really impressed, so he brings her down, and they excavate a big Maya city next to Bonaparte, one called Piedras Negras, Black Rocks, because there are all these rocks, huge boulders on the river that have this black patina on them, called Black Rocks. And so they're excavating at the site, and the woman's name is Tatiana Poshkuryakov. Say that fast 3 times. She's in her, I think she's 21 maybe when she comes down here for the first time. And she starts to do all of the drawings of all of the different sculptures that she sees in this city. And being the person who's there drawing every detail and learning every detail of all of these sculptures, she notices a pattern. She notices that the faces of the people are all distinct, and the bodies are a little different, but yet they all have the same hieroglyphs, the same symbols under each one. And she is able, by comparing the different hieroglyphs and juxtaposing them with different people, she's able to figure out that the hieroglyphs mean that this person is a king. And she's able to eventually figure out that through understanding how numbers work in hieroglyphs, she's able to figure out that the glyphs that she's looking at record the date of birth, accession to the throne, and death of each king. And so she's able to reconstruct an entire history out of these hieroglyphs that people up until that point, one, were not really able to read, and two, thought that they all had to do with astronomical observations and mathematical calculations. She was able to prove that it's history written in stone, complex histories of these cities.
Excuse me, what was the year? What time frame was this?
This is about 1955.
Oh, and from 1909 when she came to 1955? That's what confused me.
Yeah, I guess not. But she, after her experience in Piedras Negras, she came back to the States and worked with him at the museum, and then went on to Harvard and worked there, and there she learned to speak English. And in fact, she died, I want to say in the early 1980s, and she has been so influential in Maya archaeology and discovering ancient Maya writing that she, in her will, asked to be buried at Piedras Negras. And I was excavating there the year that they brought her ashes, and we went up to the highest temple and buried her in that temple. It was amazing. So she is buried there to this day. You can go and see her little headstone there. So this is one of her drawings of that city, extraordinary city. And she was able to piece together the history, the entire history of the city through those sculptures, which is really remarkable. All right, the very last discovery I want to tell you about, and sort of an introduction to the Maya, happened just 3 years ago. And a friend of ours was out searching for one of these smaller kind of Maya towns that rumor had it that it was in this place or that place, and it had been, all of the monuments had been looted from it, and they were all at the art market. So he wanted to get there and see and stop the looting and do some excavation. And he got terribly lost. And he was lost for about 2 days with his guides. And he has these terrible stories that they had no water, and so they had to cut vines and suck water out of the vines and all this business. And so he's really, really tired. And it's really hot. You know, it's in the middle of the Guatemalan jungle. And so he sees one of these mounds, one of these temples in ruins. And he sees that looters, people who steal the artifacts, have cut a big hole in the side of this temple. And so he's going in just to get out of the sun because he's just really beat. And just like the guy who was at Bonampak, he pulls his flashlight up, and this is what he sees. All these stories of people wandering in and finding these murals by accident. And it's true, it happens all the time. It's an extraordinary mural. And it's really very, very detailed and complex, and I won't take time to break it all down, but I'll point out that you see a person here in the middle. They're dressed up in this really fancy costume. It's a maize god costume, a corn god costume. Corn was king to the Maya. The Maya were all about corn. They believed their bodies were made of corn. Corn was just very central to their religion. So he's dressed up as the corn god, personifying the corn god. And he's holding a stingray spine. It's exaggerated in size, but he's holding a stingray spine. And can you see all of this red stuff? Blood. More blood. Yeah. This time the blood is coming out of his penis. He has perforated the end of his penis with this stingray spine, and there's blood coming out everywhere. Why on earth would he do that? If you know the Maya believe, and they still do, there are 2.5 million Maya that still live in this area, that blood is your essence. Blood is your spirit. They called it your cool, your essence, your way. And that was the most sacred substance. And if you didn't have blood, you would be dead. Quite observant. And so the greatest way to honor the gods, the greatest way to honor your ancestors and to give thanks was to give them some of your blood. And so they were always piercing themselves and giving blood. Men would do it primarily in the penis. Women would do it not in the penis. Women would do it either on their tongue, and so the blood would come out of their tongue. They would take a cord and push thorns in it, and then pull the cord through the tongue. And so it was very symbolic because if you had blood coming out of your mouth, and you were speaking to the ancestors with your blood. Or sometimes they would do it in the ear, just the earlobes too. Yes, sir.
Yes. Did the Mayans practice human sacrifice?
Did the Mayans practice human sacrifice? Most certainly, yes. But we have very little direct evidence for it. like bodies where we can tell definitively that were beheaded or were otherwise killed. So yes, they did, but it wasn't a very common occurrence. But here we're bloodletting. And human sacrifice actually is more associated with the Aztec. And this is what the Spanish are seeing when they come. The Aztec also believed that blood is a very sacred substance. They're a Mesoamerican group, but they believed in giving the whole human life, not just being but what is really remarkable about this picture is what's next to the individual. I don't know if you can make it out because of the light here, but it's a tree. I have a drawing of it here. It's a tree. And you can see the base of the tree, and it goes up, and there's a bird sitting on top of the tree. And it's remarkable because this mural dates to about 200 BC. It's one of the earliest murals we have in the entire Maya area. And it's showing this amazing tree that's central to this very holy, sacred scene that's going on with bloodletting. And it's not just any tree. It's a tree that we see depicted thousands of times by the ancient Maya on pottery, in some of their bark paper books. They're always talking about this tree, and they call it the world tree. And it's the tree that holds up the world. It's very, very important to their belief system. In the mid-1500s, when the Spanish are around talking to the Maya have this oral history about essentially their Bible, how the world was created, the first people, that whole thing. And so they tell this to the Spanish, and the Spanish write it down. They write it in Spanish, and they write it in Maya language. And they refer to it as Popol Vuh, the council book, or the book of the council. Because usually in Maya communities, one individual would be invested with the memory of that community. And they would come and they would tell stories to everybody and share the stories. It's an oral tradition. And so the Spanish recorded this oral tradition in the 1500s, and it's all about this world tree and how the world tree grew and how it provided for everybody on Earth and all this stuff. It's actually a description of a well-known tree in the Maya area called the ceiba tree. These get to be enormous. These are the largest trees in Central America. I don't know if you've ever seen a ceiba tree, but it is gargantuan, just huge. And so it's no wonder why they picked that, to be their world tree. We have a monument that dates to about 2000 BC, 4,000 years ago, that shows an image of the world tree as a crocodile. Here's the tree, and here's that bird, that mysterious bird that sits in the tree. What is this bird? The bird has a particular role in the oral tradition of the history of the world. That's just of interest. And then when the Spanish arrived in the 1500s, they're still depicting the exact same world tree. Here's the caiman, and then here's the bird sitting in the tree. So they've kept this tradition of a tree alive for 3,500 years by the time the Spanish arrived. That's a long time. That's a very long time to have one central image and a belief system attached to that image. There's a really cool depiction of this world tree at a Maya city called Palenque, another big tourist center in Chiapas. And this world tree is, you can see it maybe better in the drawing, it's coming up in sort of the background. And this is Pakal, the first king, descending into the maws of the earth lord, going because he just died, and this is his burial at the camp. And here's the world tree, and there's that bird sitting on top. What's of interest about this particular sarcophagus lid, and that's what's carved on it, is the depiction of the world tree itself. And you'll see it looks like a Christian cross. So you can imagine when the Spanish arrive, the miscommunication that happens immediately. And they see the Christian cross, and the Maya are there, and they see the Spanish have their world tree already. So there's constant miscommunications. But what's of interest in this particular image is that it shows the cross of the world tree as what we call a double-headed serpent bar. And it's a bar with two feathered serpent heads on either side. There are reasons for this, but what's of interest is that serpent bar is depicted in most of monumental art of the Maya when it comes to kings. And kings would show themselves carrying this serpent bar, and that's what would make them king. Because they're personifying the world tree. They're acting like they're the world tree, like they're the ones holding up the universe. That's why they're king. And so anytime you see somebody holding a serpent bar, you know that's the king. Because they're acting like the world tree. They're acting like they are in charge of the center of the universe. Now, okay, so that's interesting. And here I have